This is the hardest thing I've ever filmed. Harder than any triple I've ever done, harder than any combo, harder than any flip precision. My name is Christopher Hollingsworth, and this is what's left of him right here in this bag.
Where do you think is an appropriate place to spread these?
That's a good question. 3 years ago, my girlfriend at the time broke up with me. I was so hurt that I decided I would never allow myself to feel pain like that again. I died that day. Literally, who I was ceased to be. So I created a new persona to take the place of who I was. A character so strong and fearless that he was invulnerable to all damage, physical and emotional. I had never smoked weed or drank coffee before this, but once I created this new persona, I started smoking with my friends and drinking coffee and energy drinks to push myself in my training. I would deaden my emotions with weed, get rid of my physical pain with painkillers, and amp up my body to push my training with stimulants. Within 3 days of the breakup, I had sold the engagement ring I had and bought a plane ticket to San Diego. And strong, fearless me got on that plane with $70 in my pocket. I eventually found a house that I could afford in a rough neighborhood in Southern California. 3-hour bus ride to and from work. But strong, fearless me could handle it. I got to the house and was crammed into a room with 4 other people I didn't know. They were all heavy drug users, and I came home within the first few days to find that all of my possessions had been stolen. I watched from my bunk as they would shoot up heroin and smoke crack, but strong, fearless me could handle it. I started working as a parkour instructor, doing all 12 classes a week by myself. But strong, fearless me could handle it. On several occasions, I witnessed a bad overdose, telling the same person that stole from me that they were safe in my arms, waiting for the ambulance to arrive. But strong, fearless me could handle it. And that was my life for an entire year. I would wake up and smoke, take a 3-hour bus ride to work, drink a bunch of coffee and take painkillers, train super hard, and then bus 3 hours back to my house where I would smoke myself to sleep. I was scared, and I was lonely, but I wouldn't admit that to myself. That's where my friend Ray comes in. I had known Ray Brightstar Bilker since the 1st grade. We had gone through middle school, high school, and college together, and he was my closest friend. I called him, and I told him that we could have our own room together if we split rent, and he agreed immediately, and within the next few days, he was down there with me.
Stare into the light. Stare into the light. Stare.
I wasn't as alone, and I wasn't as scared, but I was still smoking, and I was still taking painkillers. At this point, those things were essential to the character that I had created, and I was quickly reaching a breaking point. One day, right before class, I got a phone call from my aunt that my father had died from a drug overdose. I thought about what he went through when he died. But strong, fearless me didn't feel anything at that point. And I walked back into the building and coached for another 6 hours. Ray took me out that night to a barcade. He was there for me when I didn't even know I needed someone to be there. Of course, I was high the entire time. Then I met Cordelia, and she loved me so unconditionally that the emotional walls that I had built up slowly began to crumble. I stopped taking painkillers. I stopped drinking caffeine, but I kept smoking weed. Strong, fearless me couldn't be strong and fearless without it. On my way to the 2015 Fool's Jam, I was arrested in Idaho for having a gram of weed on me. I spent a week in jail and was released with only a $2,000 fine and 100 hours of community service. I was just grateful I wasn't going to prison, honestly. I got home and I smashed all my pieces. I called all my friends and told them I needed their support. 7% of the people that smoke chronically will experience post-acute withdrawal symptoms, which is one of the hardest things I've had to deal with. Your emotions change minute to minute, your hands sweat, you can't sleep at night, you experience panic attack and pure terror. You absolutely can be addicted to weed. You absolutely can. I was psychologically addicted to weed. And during this time, I was still required to work my 12 classes a week, day after day after day, and life didn't seem worth living anymore. I eventually convinced myself that I could control my weed consumption and started smoking again. And I put in my 2 weeks at work that day. I remember this one night, Ray was drunk and he looked at me and he said, "You know, Chris, I just want to give you everything that I possibly can in this life. I just want to give you everything that I can." And I looked at him for a second and I was like, "You've already given me so much, man. Like, here you are down here in San Diego with me, like my only friend, you know?" And I really wouldn't know what that meant until he offered to give me his RV. I didn't know that he was depressed. I didn't know what he was going through. I got my license a couple of days before leaving California and drove the RV from California to Colorado. I felt lost still from my experiences in California, still smoking daily, but beginning to resent how I felt, and I didn't know why. Then one day, I was sitting at home, and it was Ray's brother. And he said, "Ray shot himself last night. He's dead." And then something inside me broke. I felt such an intense pain and loss that the character I created couldn't exist in the same place as the pain I was feeling. And I started crying, and my first breakup came up. The death of my father came up. The death of my best friend came up. And I felt the impact of every single one of those things. And it was the most intense thing I've ever felt in my life. But afterwards, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. I cried more in those 2 weeks than I have in my entire life combined. But I started healing, and I had gratitude for the experiences, for my father, for my friend. The first time I quit was out of fear, but the second time I quit was out of love for myself.
As kids, we believed that the angels talked.
The only thing I can do is love him. That's it. That's the only thing that I can do at this point. And I know in my heart that when he said, "I just want to give you everything I can in this life," he meant it. That was him telling me that he loved me.
We grew up believing good wins over bad.
Yes, Ray. Yes, you're so good. Yes.
I always thought that strength was in not feeling fear or feeling sadness. But to have felt fear and sadness and accepted those emotions in yourself is to know a strength far greater than having ever been fearless.
Yes.